Hi, good morning. As you guys know, I'm Marcy Flumke. I'm not usually on camera. I hide in the background. But I wanted to thank you all for joining us today and bearing with us changing this to a virtual platform instead of being in person. But as we see what's going around the state right now, we made the right decision. I'm going to pass this over to Lee Hoffman.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. And yes, thank you for your flexibility. My name is Lee Hoffman. I am the chair of the E2 Council. And despite the fact that it's virtual, it's still going to be an exciting meeting this morning. We have key representatives from both the environmental sector and the energy sector who will be talking about their legislative plans for the upcoming session. It's going to be a vibrant session with a lot of things going on, I have a feeling. And so you don't want to waste a whole lot of time listening to me. But before we turn it over to Ashley, who's going to introduce our speakers this morning, wanted to make a couple of announcements. At the last meeting in December, we gave out some awards, and the next time that we're in person, Chuck, you'll get your plaque, rest assured. However, we did want to point out that last year, Tracy Gianfrido had the best attendance record of anyone in E2, and therefore E2 has made a donation in her honor at Knox Park for breaking the record. The other piece of good news that we have is that we have a new Energy Committee chair, Wizi Noura, who is the State Policy Director for New England for Dominion Energy, has graciously agreed to step in and chair our Energy Committee. She'll be starting up with reports next month, but we're really looking forward to having her joining the steering committee and joining the E2 team. Unfortunately, with those pieces of good news comes a piece of bad news, at least for us. It's good news for Steve Eidelman in that Steve is going to retire and live the good life. He has announced that he is retiring at the end of January from Pratt & Whitney. The bad news for us is that he is obviously leaving E2 and his co-chairmanship of the Air Committee. So we will miss him greatly. Steve, you've been fantastic to work with, and we wish you all the best in retirement. And then finally, for those of you who hadn't heard, Betsy Wingfield is announcing her retirement at the end of January as well as Deputy Commissioner from Connecticut Deep. She announced that at a couple of public meetings, but if you haven't been at those meetings, you may not have heard the news, but she is retiring at the end of the month. And so with that, by way of announcements, I'd like to turn things over to Ashley Zane to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Lee. Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. So we are lucky to be joined by a few of our legislators up at the Capitol. So starting out with the Environment Committee, we have the Senate Chair, Senator Christine Cohen. She's from the 12th District, which has Branford, Durham, Guilford, Killingworth, Madison, and North Branford. We're also joined by the House Chair, Representative Joe Gresko, who represents the 121st House District in Stratford. We're also joined by the ranking member, Representative Stephen Harding, who represents the 107th, which is Brookfield, Bethel, and Danbury. And we're also joined by Chairman Gillett. She began serving on PURA in 2018. Before that, she was Vice President of External Relationships for the Energy Storage Association, which is a national trade association representing the energy storage industry. So welcome. So what we're going to have you do is just start out with Senator Cohen, just some of your priorities and what you see as hot button issues coming up in the 2022 session, which starts on February 9th.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ashley. Good to be here. I always love these meetings. I'm sorry that we're not in person and that you're all not out there enjoying that fantastic quiche that's served every year, gathering and being able to chat with one another but glad that we are able to have these tools so that we can continue on in this tradition one way or another. I do want to just say Senator Needleman is working on getting into the room as well, who is the Senate Chair of the Energy Committee, so he should be joining us shortly. I know I was having some issues with connectivity this morning as well, so just wanted to mention that. But you know, I'm really excited about the upcoming session. It is one of the shortest possible, only 12 weeks. So we have a very limited amount of time in which to really impact the law and put forth some really good proposals that help the state of Connecticut in a tremendous way. So it's a daunting task. We don't know what's happening in terms of whether the session will be partially virtual. You know, we're in the midst of a COVID surge right now, hoping that we are nearing potentially endemic, which would be amazing. That's what I'm going to throw out there and hope happens so that we can all start to see some normalcy in our lives again. I know so many of us have been impacted by this insidious virus, and we really want to be able to get back to work. I know I can speak for my colleagues. It's very difficult to be in session and not, you know, be in the building and be able to negotiate and talk to all of you about how we're impacting, you know, various pieces of the environment as it respect, you know, with respect to climate and energy and renewables and all of that. So I think, you know, we'd all like to be back and have some semblance of normalcy again with public hearings and moving forward these important pieces of legislation. So in terms of what's coming up, you know, I'm sure my colleagues will have a lot to add to this. You know, we continue to see so many of you participate in the release-based working group. You know, we're keeping a close eye on that. Fantastic work is being done there. And, you know, we are not active participants as the legislature, but we are listening and having all of you experts out there really leading the way. So pleased with how that's going. And I think we'll, you know, throughout the session be keeping a close eye on that. We continue to have a waste issue in the state of Connecticut, and now with the impending shutdown of the PURA plant, that really needs to continue to be one of the focuses of the Environment Committee, waste mitigation methods. We, you know, did a lot as far as, you know, incentivizing organic separation last session. And I think we need to continue down the road of waste mitigation techniques, separation techniques. You know, we've started the discussion on extended producer responsibility last session. I think you'll see a continuation of that discussion as we move forward. And, you know, specifics around certain materials as well, like expanded polystyrene, you know, continued discussion there. Climate, obviously, at the forefront of what we should be doing, taking climate action. We did not pass the Transportation Climate Initiative, but we still have that small little issue of not meeting our air quality standards with respect to the Global Warming Solutions Act. And so we really need to be focused on what we can do to alleviate some of the burdens, particularly from transportation emissions, which is really a concern for us and should be a concern for all the residents of Connecticut. And so I think you might see the Environment Committee trying to team up a bit with the Transportation Committee, put our heads together. We did have some bills last session, such as the medium heavy duty vehicle adopting the California standards. There was a portion of that in the governor's latest executive order. But those are the types of things that we'll be looking closely at to see what we can do to alleviate some of these transportation emissions and the burdens they're placing on our communities. And a further look at resiliency, which is something that I've been really passionate about over the past 3 years, making sure that our towns and cities are prepared for storm surges, flooding, and sea level rise. And so we're talking a lot about that, and I think we'll have continued discussions as we go forward about how we can help our municipalities shore up coastlines and inland communities, be prepared for storm surges as well, making sure we have resilient infrastructure and the like. So I'm talking a lot. I'll let other people. I know we have a lot of folks on, and there's so much to cover. And as I said, it's an incredibly short session. And we have a lot to tackle, but I think we can do it, and I hope that you'll all be in our corner helping us out, providing expert advice and opinions.
Great, thank you so much for that. Representative Gresko.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out from your daily schedule to participate. And basically, in a nutshell, what she said. We're working on those topics, among others. I could add a little bit to that would specifically apply to this group is over the course of the last off session, we've had ongoing negotiations with and talks with the cylinder industry, specifically Worthington. And I have to say that they were very committed to coming up with an EPR following the bill that didn't pass last session. They rolled up their sleeves, and I'm hopeful that we're going to get some sort of EPR out of them. And I'm going to use them as a teaching moment with other industries and with other groups that we have been having negotiations with to potentially do another EPR in how it's easier for everyone if cooperation is the key. I'm not looking to we're not looking to mandate things that are unreasonable. We just want to hear it from the industry and let them craft what is doable and what is accomplishing for the state of Connecticut. We can look back at the mattresses success. We can look back at paint, batteries, electronics. So I like the path that we're going down for that, and I would assume that we would be trying for tires again this coming session. As far as animals go, I think that we're going to be looking at something along the lines of forage fish and see what we can do for that. But as Christine was saying, it's a very short session, so we're going to have to prioritize what we can get over the finish line and possibly, use the less is more strategy going forward for that. As far as land use, just making sure, as we did last year, to fully fund the grant programs, the OSWA and the Natural Heritage, and not to mention Greenway bonding for those projects. And I know that Representative Harding, who will probably be following me, has been working with our Vice Chair, Representative Palm, on invasives, and specifically hydrilla. So I will let him speak about that. And the other thing I wanted to end with was, I'm sure everyone saw maybe a few weeks ago, the piece that was in the news that was generated out of Brown University, and how a lot of environment bills and environmental initiatives are kind of defeated because of opposition from industry and from lobbyists. And I would just say that taking that for what it's worth, as far as it wasn't just Connecticut, it was Massachusetts and the other states that were analyzed by Brown. And again, I point to the cylinder industry in cooperation and making strides towards what we all know in our hearts are important things and environmentally. The market is driving some of this. We've all seen what the vehicles will look like, hopefully still within my lifetime, and I think those market forces are more or less being encouraged by the Environment Committee, and I would hope that we can move forward with that cooperative spirit. So that's where I am, and thank you for the invitation. And like Christine said, it would have been nice to see everybody in person, but maybe we'll shoot for that for the 2023 session. So thank you.
Well, you were correct because Rep. Harding is up next.
Yep. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to Christine and to Joe for their overview. And I agree very much with what they have to say. I'm not going to repeat a lot of it. I think that they're spot on with what our goals are. This environmental committee, this session for the Environment Committee. You know, I think Joe addressed something that's important to me, particularly to my area of the state, which is invasives. As I have Candlewood Lake and Lake Winona in my district, and something that's critically important to preserving that natural resource. But I know the Environment Committee is committed and will have initiatives to protect all other natural resources throughout our state. That's one of the things that makes our state unique, as we know, is our natural beauty, and our natural resources, and preserving those are critical to not only the beauty of the state, but also our environment and our economy. You know, to Joe's point, just following up quickly on what he had to say, you know, I agree. I think that, you know, we can find solutions, and we have found solutions to addressing issues, critical issues regarding our environment, and at the same time doing it cohesively with business. And ensuring that we can work together. We can do something that is reasonable, and at the same time really does a lot to help our environment. And that's why we have sessions like this, because we need to hear from you directly what's working, what's not working, and what proposals may work and what proposals may not work. And if a proposal doesn't work, you know, why not? And what can we do to fix it? So. I look forward to a nice discussion today, and really hearing from all of you who are the experts in your particular fields. That allows us to craft legislation that not only is a positive piece of legislation for the environment and for the state, but at the same time is practical too. And that's why these sessions are so important. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to speaking with everybody.
Great. So thank you to the Environment Committee. And shifting gears a little bit, we're going to be shifting over to the Energy Committee. We are joined by Senator Norm Needleman, who represents the 33rd District, which has quite a lot of towns: Chester, Clinton, Colchester, Deep River, East Haddam, East Hampton, Essex, Haddam, Lyme, Old Saybrook, Portland, and Westbrook. And we are also joined by Representative Arconti of the 109th, which represents Danbury. So Senator Needleman, why don't you start us off?
A different kind of meeting. I had to figure out how to unmute. So good morning, everyone. All I see are the people on the screen, and they probably know that I talk too much anyway. You know, the Energy Committee, we've been talking about what our plans are. Personally, I am going to focus a lot on highlighting the vulnerabilities that are being thrown in our face continually by ISO and Eversource about this winter reliability issue. We have spent a lot of time and energy focused on building out renewables, but I'm very concerned. The more I read into it, the more my co-chair David reads into it, the more I realize that we have this really bad Achilles heel here. Can spend a lot of time talking about how we got here, but I don't think this is the right forum for it. To plan on having a forum about this come for February 1st, hopefully. But a lot of it has to do with having created a market since 2000 that no one is really responsible for. And I think it's catastrophic for us. I think it's catastrophic more in the context of climate change tells you to expect the unexpected. I think it's also catastrophic in the sense that we are proceeding forward with a 10-year plan that's going to make everything in your life electrified, like transportation and heat pumps and power tools and all kinds of other stuff. And I'm just concerned that we're taking a market weakness that we have very little say over, and that we're going to make worse. So I think my job this year is going to be focused a lot on that. Rep. Arconti has some great ideas for programs that we've talked about that I think we're going to do that hopefully move the needle on some carbon reduction goals also. But we on the committee in a bipartisan way have worked really, really thoughtfully, I'd like to believe, trying to make sure that we balance cost, reliability, and resiliency, and mitigating climate change, because all three of them are what makes us competitive as a state, what demonstrate our values and our goals. But this, even though what's happening with ISO right now is not new, they're sort of raising alarm bells, I think, in part because of what happened in Texas, where the grid manager failed. Their equivalent of ISO. The good news is that PURA has been working on much, much more sophisticated contingency plans in the event that that ever happened. And again, I want to say that it's a remote chance, but it's not no chance that we could have rolling blackouts in the middle of a winter cold snap where people would lose all power for rolling periods of time. Not acceptable in 2022 in Connecticut. So that's it. Happy New Year, such as it is, to everybody. Sort of. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And Representative Arconti.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for having us. Good to be here this morning. One bill I was especially proud of last session, just to touch on that real quick, was the energy storage, very ambitious energy storage legislation. Our committee and the legislature passed a really strong piece of legislation. It didn't get as much climate fanfare as I thought it would from our state and the governor, but it received a lot of regional attention through various renewable energy associations and publications. And it's going to be really great for our state. PURA implemented that bill in their docket, I think within a couple months, and they stood up the program starting January 1st. So I'm really excited for a lot of folks on this call to participate in those programs. And then, touch on everything what Norm said. He's absolutely right. ISO is becoming more and more vulnerable. We're looking to have a forum on resiliency, reliability, deregulation, how that's affected Connecticut and the region, and how that's going to affect us over especially the next decade. Because every winter that goes by, I hate to be a little fear-mongering, but every winter that goes by, we increase the odds of load shedding event needing to occur, because ISO no longer has a winter reliability plan. FERC deemed their previous plan was not fuel neutral because it incentivized generators keeping oil on site for really long cold snaps. From my perspective, that's appropriate. But since ISO has orders that they have to be fuel neutral in their design, they have to come up with a new plan. And they haven't done that yet. So ISO doesn't have one for an extended cold snap. So Senator Needleman in our rankings, we're looking at shedding a little bit more light on that and trying to work with other states with the grid operator for a solution. And then some things for upcoming this session. We want to build upon the congressional bipartisan infrastructure bill. It places a big bet on green hydrogen. So I've been working with a lot of stakeholders over the last few weeks and months, putting together a green hydrogen roadmap for the state of Connecticut to ideally draw a regional hydrogen hub, which should be hugely beneficial to the manufacturing sector, a way to decarbonize our natural gas infrastructure, a way to decarbonize hard to decarbonize sectors such as manufacturing and industrial transportation. And, just to touch on, I always encourage everybody to follow the PURA dockets and all the work that Chair Gillett has been doing. And I always advocate for participation in those dockets because they can only make decisions based on public comment. So it's so important to have as much robust participation as possible. Really great seeing some of the decisions they've come out with lately around EV infrastructure in particular. And one more bill that we're thinking of throwing out there this year is re-examining the Scaf program, the Shared Clean Energy Facilities. That's a program that was created in statute in 2018 and stood up by Deep and Pure a couple of years later. I think it's time to revisit the caps on that program, to revisit who is eligible and who can own the systems in that program. It's a way to deploy clean energy in our state, but do it in a way that benefits Connecticut developers, Connecticut ratepayers, and to keep jobs and the tax revenue that's generated from those types of projects in our state.
Yay.
Great.
Hi.
So
All right, so shifting gears more towards the regulatory side, Chairman Gillett, you're also joined by Taryn O'Connor as well. So take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate being included in breakfast this morning. And as Ashley mentioned, Taryn O'Connor is with me this morning. She's PURA's Director of Legislation and Communications. So if you haven't had the chance to meet myself or her, I know both of us came on shortly before or during the pandemic in Taryn's case. So it's been difficult to make all the connections that we normally otherwise would have. And I think that's a good place to start in terms of talking about legislative priorities, which is that we are really looking ahead of session to make sure that PURA is more accessible both to organizations like CBIA as well as individual legislators. I think PURA is one of the most misunderstood and underutilized state agencies that there are, and I don't think that's unique to Connecticut. I think that's an issue with regulatory commissions across the country. And so we're really trying to scale up our efforts to be more accessible and explaining our processes. And as Representative Arconti mentioned, I think that that's a crucial indicator for how our decisions have turned out as of lately, as we're reflecting both additional feedback directly from elected officials, whether it's some of the folks on the phone today who have contributed comments into our docket, or local municipal officials. CBIA has contributed comments. So all of those, I hope, whether we have come out on the side of your comments or not, I hope you can see that they have been duly considered and reflected in the decision making. And if you are interested at any time in receiving, a PURA 101 or an update or an explanation about how to engage in the proceeding, Taryn will gladly get you on the schedule for that. So just wanted to start there. And then I want to say that PURA, speaking for PURA, our priorities this session will be to support the committee in understanding and working through their priorities. PURA, and I think that should be how PURA works, not just this session, but in all sessions. We will have one agency bill that actually has been seen before. It's last session, it was Senate Bill 858. However, we're going to strip it down to just the modifications to safety enhancements to gas pipeline processes. So there was an attempt last session, the session before, to try to update our safety provisions for the regulation of natural gas pipelines to match the federal requirements. So we're going to come forward with just that bill. It was previously packaged with some call before you dig enhancements, which we think we've addressed in another way. So besides that, I just want to harken back to some of the things that have come out of the last 2 sessions. You know, Representative Arconti touched on them, the storage bill. He also championed the fuel cell procurement bill last session. And I think everyone on the phone is aware of the Take Back Our Grid Act from the special session of 2020. And that has left PURA with a lot of work on its plate. And I think we are looking to, you know, effectively and cost effectively implement those programs. So it wouldn't be really fair of me to come to the legislature and ask for more work when I have plenty coming from those previous sessions. And that includes like the economic development tariff rate that was we were authorized to undertake coming out of the Take Back Our Grid Act. I'm looking forward to digging into those and continuing to partner with the E&T committee, and which I've been really impressed, having come from another state, how bipartisan that committee works. And I really applaud the co-chairs and the ranking members for their leadership on that. Just want to say, I think it's been a real pleasure getting to know all of you over the past 2 sessions, and looking forward to trying to bring to the table a perspective on how the legislation would, how any piece of legislation may impact both our current plans and our future plans, and especially how it might align with other states in our region or nationally, because I'm a big proponent of trying to make sure that we are understanding how it's been done elsewhere, and I mean this broadly, how anything has been done elsewhere, and whether that's an appropriate solution for our state at this point, and where we are in energy policy. Because as I quickly learned when I took this role, we have the highest electricity rates in the continental 48 states on a per kilowatt hour basis. And that's at a time where we need increasing investment into our local distribution infrastructure, both on the gas and the electric side. So I look forward to working with the committee members on how to increase the value of what ratepayers are already paying for. So thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you all so much for that. We did get a few questions ahead of time from email, but if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the chat function. We're going to open it up to Q&A. So circling back to the Environment Committee, are we going to see any legislation bills on PFAS? So why don't we start with you, Senator Cohen?
My favorite topic. And yes, I think we will. We scratched the surface on PFAS last session, and we're starting to see, as the state begins to test more and more towns for their water, we're starting to see contamination levels that are a bit concerning. And of course, with that comes, filtration systems that need to be need to be installed rather, and remediation work. And so I think we're going to start to see more and more of this. I think it's something that the state really needs to pay attention to. We're going to need to find funding mechanisms for those cleanups and for remediation for safe drinking water. So I think we need to be looking at that. We need to look at its impact on water and soil. We have a lot of research going on across the state with respect to PFAS. So I know Representative Gresko and I have talked about this, and last session we talked with ranking members about our need to maybe delve into this a little bit further. We know that states like Vermont to our north passed legislation around the same time as we did that went a little bit deeper, got into some of the textiles. We know California has stricter regulations around PFAS chemicals, and we know we're finding out more and more every day about the dangers to not only the environment, but to human health as well. So I do think you'll see more on this, and I think you'll see a collaboration between the Environment Committee and the Public Health Committee on it as well.
Great. Representative Gresko or Representative Harding, anything to add?
Oh, as I said before, what she said.
Yeah, I assume that there's going to definitely be a discussion around PFAS, and because of the impact it has not only in the environment but the public health. The key is it's so encompassing, and it's seen in so many different materials, and so that's where we have to be practical about how we implement this, and that's where the business community comes into play, and how we can practically make this work. Where, as I mentioned in the beginning when I spoke, we're protecting the health and environment, but at the same time we're doing it practically, where we can actually enforce the law. I think that's the biggest thing that I think we came into issues with last session is enforceability, because it's so encompassing.
Great, thank you. Another question we had for the energy folks. Can you touch on some of Connecticut's unique energy attributes, such as fuel cells, offshore wind, Dominion, battery storage, and solar?
That's a great question, because we really are uniquely positioned for all of those technologies. We have 2 deep water ports that make us so very well positioned for offshore wind industry. Deep still has 1,200 megawatts of procurement authority that we gave them from 2019, that they can go out and procure more offshore wind. But again, that ties right into our fuel cell industry and the green hydrogen roadmap idea, where green hydrogen, right, is essentially electricity generated by solar, offshore wind, nuclear, fed into a fuel cell through electrolysis, creates the hydrogen, which is green because there's been no emissions throughout that whole process. And we do have Millstone. Listen, I'm a supporter of. I support nuclear energy. It's an important aspect to our grid. It's an important aspect for reliability, and we need it to meet the states and the region's net zero goals. However, that plant was built as a regional resource. It has regional benefits. It's base load for the region. And right now it's being supported just by essentially Connecticut, ratepayers. And that just goes back into the conversation that Senator Needleman brought up a little earlier around ISO. And, what's our relationship with ISO? What's their relationship with us? These are some bigger questions that, this committee, this legislature is going to have to answer over the next couple of years. But going back to the original question, we are uniquely positioned with great industries and great companies, and all of those generating aspects. We're attracting new storage investments because of our bill last year and how quickly PURA implemented it, and our ambitious goal of 1,000 megawatts of deployment by 2030. Just like the goal of 2,000 megawatt procurement, it attracted all the investments in our ports, etc., because of the commitment this legislature made. And we did the same with storage, and we'll do the same with other technologies in our energy sector going forward, with always costs being at the forefront.
Great. Chairman Gillett or Senator Needleman, would you like to add anything?
I think David said it very well. We are uniquely positioned to be leaders in this, and we're trying to be, ever with that watchful eye on how it impacts ratepayers, especially lower income and low middle income, as well as business ratepayers who need to survive in the state. It's great to put certain ideological goals out in the front, but we just can't do that and keep burying more cost into the system. So again, reliability, resiliency, cost, market design, these are all things we're working on and we're thoughtful about. And the fact that we have fuel cell companies in the state, the fact that we're going to be a leader in offshore wind makes me feel like we have our work cut out for us. And as David said, a great partner in PURA and DEEP. I mean, everybody's working together to try to get to the other side of this and figure it out. The decisions 20 years ago to deregulate, retrospectively, I'm not so sure were the best ideas. So,
And if I could just add on a little bit, to what both of the co-chairs said, I want to come back to the storage and how impactful, as Representative Arconti noted, it put us on the map in terms of the country and the goals that are being set elsewhere at a time when the industry is still trying to get its foothold as to where it wants to set up shop in terms of the United States. I think that was hugely impactful, and I want to note that it is possible to take some of these ambitious goals that the legislature is giving us and turn them into a program that has ratepayer benefits. And I don't know how many folks on the line are familiar with different cost effectiveness testing, but there's a measure called the RIM, the Ratepayer Impact Measure, which looks solely at the costs and benefits to the individual ratepayer, whether you are a participant or not in the program. And the program that we were able to design has a 1.4 RIM, which means that it is going to deliver more savings to the grid than it is going to cost the ratepayers. And so I think that that is an example that I would hold up not just to you all, but to my colleagues in other states of how the synergies between the legislature and the regulatory agency can take something and deliver benefits, not just from a individual ratepayer perspective, but we're also sent long-term price signals to these companies. It's a 9-year program, which is way more than enough of a runway for companies to justify investment in this state. So I think we're unique there. We also really, I think, need to leverage the fuel cell industry in the state, and the hydrogen map should, the hydrogen roadmap that I'm hearing Representative Arconti, getting tongue-tied, Representative Arconti and Senator Needleman allude to, I think is an excellent opportunity to do that. The fuel diversity issues that both of the co-chairs have alluded to are going to persist. We're in a region that relies almost exclusively at some points on natural gas to fire or to create the electricity that we're all using. And having the fuel diversity backed from the homegrown industries of the fuel cell and the fuel cell industry and Dominion, I think are something that we should be encouraging if we're going to be able to reach some of the more aggressive targets in 2040. So looking forward to working with the co-chairs and all the stakeholders on that.
Great. Thank you so much for all those answers. Shifting back over to environment, another question we got was several, well, I would actually say more than half of the people in this group are working on the release-based working group. They've been caught by surprise twice by DEEP. First, they were told that the group wouldn't get to see draft regulations before they came out. And then earlier this week, they were told that they wouldn't use risk-based standards in the same way that Massachusetts does. How closely will the Environment Committee be monitoring things so that a post-Transfer Act world isn't worse than the one we're in now?
Well, thanks for that, Ashley, and thanks to whoever asked that question. And unfortunately, I wasn't on the meeting this week. I've been trying to attend all of them, and I wasn't there. So I expect to be closely monitoring the activity and getting reports, not just from DEEP, but I'm hoping to hear from the folks involved, the LEPs and other environmental professionals, lawyers that are part of this working group. group. So it's good for me to hear that, good for Joe to hear that, and our ranking members to hear that, so that we stay abreast of what's happening and what's going on. And if there is conflict like that and concern, we need to raise it. So I appreciate the question and the comment, and I think we will be monitoring it closely, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, working with both the agency and all the folks in the working group to see if we can come to some resolution.
I would agree with Christine. You got to give them a chance to be able to implement what was passed legislatively during the last session, and going forward. To Christine's point, kind of been monitoring myself, but not participating because of, look, we passed a law, we're the policy. Now let them implement it. But this recon that you're providing us is good. We will be having multiple meetings with deep virtual meetings on a myriad of subjects. So we will be bringing this up to them to hear their side of the story as far as why they made those two specific decisions going forward. The not being able to see the draft before it came out is the one that kind of makes my eyebrows go up. So we will be trying to get you some answers. So thank you for that question.
And Beth or whoever asked that question, can somebody just shoot Joe and I an email about that, please?
I just want to add one thing to that. Obviously, I've been a very interested party on all this Transfer Act stuff since the beginning of the working group, and probably the only one on the call that has owned 3 Transfer Act properties. There was a deep concern that if this was not handled properly, we could make a worse program, which almost seems incomprehensible to me. Because I think that the Transfer Act was probably the worst piece of legislation that has been on the books for so long. It has really hurt our ability to sell real estate and transfer real estate in the state. And it stands out in such a terrible way from other states that it's ridiculous. There was a lot of detail in it. But it really should start from a fundamental idea that we're never going to clean up every teaspoon of dirt in the state of Connecticut. There's 175 years worth of industrial activity here. And if you buy a property and for some reason get stuck in the Transfer Act, you are technically liable for all of that 175 years worth of activity. That's a real problem and a real barrier for buying anything. So they have to fix it. I'm hopeful that they are. I haven't been that involved in the last 6 months on it, but there was a concern in the working group that there was a chance that this could be made worse and not better. And I really hope that DEEP doesn't find reasons to make it worse.
We'd like that too. And Representative Harding, anything to add up to that?
I think everyone hit the points there. I am in agreement with everybody.
Great. Another question we have is, have there been any discussions in Connecticut on ESG?
I would offer, so ESG, it stands for Environmental Social Governance, I think. I may be messing that up. But it's definitely something that has been cropping up with regulated utilities more and more. I think the most likely place that could crop up in Connecticut is during a rate case, and whether any of the utilities that we regulate are committing to those type of goals at their parent company level and how they expect those to filter down. I will say that we're, putting forward objectives through our grid mod proceedings, which are electric only right now, that kind of capture or mirror some of those ESG objectives. So we've, picked up some of those themes like energy affordability, decarbonizing the economy, making a more resilient commodity, and there's one more, breaking down barriers to the green economy, I think. So those objectives are flowing through the proceedings that PURA is doing, and we really think we derive those from objectives that have been codified in various pieces of legislation. So that's another example of how the relationship between legislation and regulation can function appropriately, in my opinion. So I think ESG to set specific goals, like that might come up in performance-based regulation, which PURA is tasked with doing as a result of the Take Back Our Grid Act. So I'd say we're in the preliminary stages of ESG in Connecticut, but that there are bits and pieces of it are already flowing through some of our proceedings. So hopefully that's helpful. But, yeah.
Great, thank you for that. And starting off with Representative Harding, this kind of transcends the Energy and the Environment Committee, but we're starting to see a lot of retirements at the state level, which is going to impact agency services, especially when we're thinking about DEEP and the various retirements that are happening. Do you see the legislature taking any efforts and any steps to mitigate the impact on that service? And how do you see that happening?
I think Steve might have had to take a call for work. So let me jump in. We passed a piece of legislation last year asking DEEP to give us an accounting of who they anticipated was going to retire. We talked earlier, and Betsy was mentioned going forward. I know of a couple of other individuals that will be retiring. But when Christine and I posed the question to DEEP on multiple occasions, they are informing us of a robust hiring I don't want to say frenzy, but they know what's coming by July 1st. So they're trying to incorporate getting individuals into positions so that they can learn from their predecessors before their predecessors retire. Sort of that passing of the baton and institutional knowledge on whatever particular topic that the individual will be working on. So it's not just a DEEP problem, it's a state of Connecticut problem. So I'm hopeful that we can make a smooth transition, at least in DEEP, because of that aggressive hiring that they are partaking in. I just a friend of one instance example, my friend Shubita from Hartford, the sustainability coordinator, was just hired by DEEP. So they are going out and picking up qualified individuals to hopefully fill those positions.
Great. And does anyone have anything else they'd like to add?
I just would say, I mean, there's no doubt we've sort of known that we were walking to the edge of this precipice, and it's going to create a seismic shift in government. You know, Betsy's just one example of, you know, years and years of knowledge that unfortunately we lose. And she's a wonderful person. And I think she's just been such a treasure for the agency. And so I know I, for one, am scared to see her go and really sad to see her go at the same time. But they have been prepping for this. You know, part of the reason we had that legislative proposal last session was to make sure that the agency, you know, that we really have cognizance over as the Environment Committee is really being mindful about how they're proceeding and making sure that, you know, all of a sudden with all these retirements this year, we're not just sitting there scratching our heads. We already know that they have quite a reputation for backlog at DEEP in particular. We want to make sure that we're actually speeding up permitting procedures and, getting properties out of the Transfer Act, in a timely manner, which I know to many of you is probably laughable that I'm even saying timely manner and Transfer Act in the same sentence. So I think we just really need to be mindful about how we move forward. I also think we have to, because we have no other choice, really look at this like as an opportunity to bring more diversity and different knowledge base to government, and perhaps establish some partnerships as well. So, I'm looking forward to seeing, what different departments do as we move forward throughout the year.
If I can, maybe I'll be brief, and I put the link in the chat, but I just want to pick up on something that Senator Cohen just said, which is that we should look at this as an opportunity. And I want to double down on my thanks to the ENT co-chairs who actually added 10 positions to PURA's headcount last session to help with some of the extra workload. I think this is not known about PURA, but our headcount, including commissioners, is 85. And we have jurisdiction over utilities that have 3,000 employees across the electric, gas, and water sectors. So we are in a hiring frenzy, not just to fill those positions, but to fill some of the retirements that have been happening along the way leading up to June. And frankly, I'm excited about bringing in new perspectives. Regulatory agencies are notorious for being difficult to staff at even the best of times because it's such a specialized skill set, in the industries that we regulate can pay more, right? So I think you have folks that get into a regulatory commission and they stay for their whole careers, and that means there's a lot of knowledge, but it also leads to what can sometimes pejoratively be referred to as regulatory capture. And it's about time that the staffing has some new perspectives and diverse perspectives, and we're looking to this as an opportunity to inject that. So hopefully you have a chance to forward our job links to your networks. We're really looking for people who think about things differently, because I think it's time for some disruption in how we do that. And I look forward to introducing some of PURA's new staff to folks in proceedings moving forward. I think it's allowed us to reduce our backlog. When I took over 2 years ago, we carried a caseload of 300 to 350 cases. We've reduced that to 80 active cases right now, which I'm sure to the utilities we regulate still feels like too much. We're keeping a busy docket, but I'm looking forward to how much we can reduce that even further as we get more staff brought on and trained up. So thanks for the question.
Great, and thanks for those answers. Another question that we got is, what can be done about the fact that reaching zero carbon goals for Connecticut is in large part impacted by the decisions of other states in the region who have distinct and separate goals? So why don't we start with Senator Needleman?
Oh boy. It's been certainly a concern of mine that since deregulation, the assets for power generation that exist in the state of Connecticut or in New England are not really state assets at all. As wonderful as it is to have Millstone, for example, in Waterford, and as much good as they do in terms of tax dollars and job creation, it is not a Connecticut asset. No power plant is a Connecticut asset. When we buy procurements, we're paying for them. That's what Representative Arconti was talking about. We're committing the full dollars. In this case, I have to say, we're probably making a few bucks on it because the price of energy is so high and the Millstone contract is so low. So you either pay for the spread if spot energy is generating at a lower price than the 4.9%, or make a few pennies if the price is more than the 4.9%. But again, we can set whatever goals we want. for carbon reduction from the power sector, but it does not mean that 10 years from now, we are not going to have gas power plants fueling part of our grid. We will have them. And we really don't have a lot to say about that. That's part of being in a market where we're not in control. We're setting goals. They're great. I appreciate the goals, but I also know that some of it is a little bit of smoke and mirrors here because these plants are not going away unless ISO says they go away. And the way the energy market is evolving right now with more and more intermittent renewables, I know Chairwoman Gillett has a vision for a slightly different, more distributed grid and with green hydrogen and we have some options to make us less reliant, but we don't decide if the power plants stay or not, right? They're here. And we don't open and close power plants. This whole multi-year battle over Killingly was ultimately decided by the market, right? ISO informed FERC that they did not need that plant, and FERC accepted ISO's recommendations. But we could have fought all we wanted. We were down to fighting over a wetlands permit for the gas line. And ultimately, much as people would have wanted it or not wanted it, it wasn't really our say. So our carbon goals are great. I just want to make sure that we don't do stuff that costs us more money when we really have no say about actual carbon reduction in the state. The goals are one thing. The reality of how we generate power is completely different. And I'm sure that Marissa is going to correct me on everything I said. So, because I'm pretty agitated about some of this stuff right now. So I'm going to let her go because I could see her waiting.
No, I'm actually not going to correct you. I would double down in some ways on what you said and offer that, from my seat at PURA, one of my concerns is that we have these lofty goals, which I don't know that it's PURA's place to comment one way or the other on them. But at the same time, we have infrastructure specifically in our state. And, whether it's the poles and wires outside your window or some of the larger transmission wires running, through our forests, we've got infrastructure that is in desperate need of upgrading. And if we're setting all of these lofty goals for procuring our energy from clean sources, we have to have the infrastructure to deliver it to the homes and businesses. So, we source the funding for a lot of these ambitious clean energy procurements. It's paid for, on the customer's electric bill, which leaves less room on the bill to pay for the infrastructure upgrades. So when Senator Needleman was alluding to my vision for a decentralized future, I think one thing that we do have control over is empowering the resilience of our individual, not just our homes and businesses, but looking to like our wastewater treatment plants. And, I think I saw Maureen Westbrook on here, and I remember during Tropical Storm Isaias, talking to her and her engineers about could their water treatment plants stay online, with that sustained commercial outage? And there are communities on well water who face those issues when the commercial power is out. So I think we just need to get a lot more creative about how we're using, harkening back to the point from the question from a couple minutes ago about the unique attributes that we have in the state. We have these homegrown, industries, whether it's deploying fuel cells, to assist with, mini microgrids at those wastewater treatment plants, or whether it is creating that program that launched on January 1 to pair battery storage with the Solar for All initiatives that came out of the legislation, several years ago. So I would just like to see us pause and evaluate whether we have the funding and the room available on our bills or another funding mechanism to make sure that our infrastructure can keep up with the ambitious goals that we're setting elsewhere, because you have got to have the reliable and resilient infrastructure if we're moving forward more broadly, and we do have control over that. So I didn't correct you, Senator Needleman. You were spot on. I don't even think I mansplained you. I think I just added to your comments. So thanks for allowing me to jump in.
It's very difficult in a world of energy experts being a layperson here, but the big fear is pushing ahead and setting goals, and some of them are great and they look great and they're PR goals, but the reality is we will have gas power plants. If we're not careful about how we do this, it's going to cost us more money. And more important, if we're not careful about it, we're not going to make ourselves more reliable as we make our lives all electric. We have programs to push EVs and heat pumps. Those are two big deals. The grid needs to be upgraded. Everything needs to happen to do that. And you just will not want to not have power. Somebody said to me at one point, the F-150, the new Ford truck, can power your house. Well, a Tesla can do that too. But imagine a power failure and you've used your battery up in your car. You no longer can go anywhere. Your battery's gone. You don't have power. You don't have a heat source because you don't have any oil or gas if you're using a heat pump. We have a power grid that's overly reliant on a single source of fuel. And we are now making our public very, very reliant on electricity. Not saying that's bad, especially with the goal to make as much of the electricity as we can carbon free. But we cannot make ourselves, I've been a manager my whole life and I manage against risk. We're adding risk. And if we're not careful, the risk is going to bite us in the butt. We don't chase cheap like ERCOT did down in Texas. And thank God we have different groups in the state, certainly at this moment being led by PURA, meeting to talk about what, if we ever got to a situation where we had to have power outages in the winter, what that would look like. Because one thing that came out of Texas, if you read into what they did, there was no plan for what happened, and cities were left on fully lit, and rural areas had no power, and people froze to death in their houses. That we cannot let that happen here. But more important, we have to fix the market, and unfortunately, it's a little bit out of our control because it's FERC. So anyway, momentarily agitated. Thank you.
Can I just jump in also? I know I'm not a energy expert by any means, but this is something I alluded to at the beginning of this discussion as well. We're obviously not meeting our targets with respect to Connecticut's Global Warming Solutions Act. And we know that, our latest report shows us that our greenhouse gas emissions rose, in the latest report, which is actually from 2017 to 2018, which is frightening. But much of that can be attributed to the transportation sector. And so we really need to focus on transportation emissions. We have this federal infrastructure package that we need to figure out how to leverage those dollars. There's really great carbon reduction programs within that infrastructure package. There's things on alternative fuel corridors. And I know this is all related because the more EVs you put on the road, the more electricity you need to generate for those electric vehicles. But there are other transportation options as well that can help us reduce transportation emissions. Some of these programs within the infrastructure package give us those federal dollars free and clear. Others require a state match. And we're really going to need to figure out, again, without the Transportation Climate Initiative, where that pool of dollars comes from, because it would be, just a sin for us to forego those dollars on carbon reduction packages as well as alternative fuel corridors because we don't have the matching funds here in Connecticut to get, a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 return on those match dollars. So I think we really, as I said, need to be focused this session, particularly on transportation emission reductions and what we're going to do, and work very closely with the Department of Transportation on, how we can marry up their goals for transportation emission reduction and streamlining transportation, improving infrastructure, and where that gets, if that gets us closer to our goals, these tough goals that we have to meet in the future.
I'll chime in super quick, and I would I'm going to advocate for PURA real quick that they also be kind of looped in on, those discussions, as a partnership with DEEP and DOT, because, right, PURA is in charge of resiliency, reliability of their grid. The work they do in their dockets. Again, I'll encourage everyone to take a look at their EV infrastructure docket, and to see the robust plan that they have for meeting to help exactly accomplish our goals that Senator Cohen is laying out. And Senator Cohen is absolutely on point with everything she just said about reducing emissions in the transportation sector. And, one thing we can do in the legislature, conversation for our committees to have is, maybe we should allow, PURA to have a third-party administrator come in and help deploy those goals if we're falling short in the near future. But I definitely think PURA has a role to play with DEEP and DOT, because we don't want to do one thing to spike the other.
Great, thanks for all those answers. Switching gears towards Representative Harding, you mentioned invasive species. What efforts do you see putting forward this session in terms of that?
It all comes down to money, and not all these things fortunately do, but in this case it does. I think the reason being is because it costs money to implement the initiatives that need to be done to protect the resources in our lakes. And so, this is something the Representative Arconti and I have both worked on together, because his district also encompasses Candlewood Lake, and we've seen, unfortunately, an increase in invasive species, and we've seen how it's impacted the lake negatively, unfortunately. So, really, what it comes down to is the lake authorities and DEEP have to have the ability to implement the policies, whether it be monitoring boats that come in for zebra mussels, which has been one issue that's really impacted the lake, or it be helping the lake authorities address different issues with what's growing in the lake and the milfoil. So really, a lot of it is just it's funds and issuing grant money to address these issues. Fortunately, we're seeing positive surpluses in this as a state, which we haven't seen since I've been in the legislature, at least. And so for years, I think that we knew that the funds weren't going to come. We're going to have to come up with more creative ideas. But I think for the first time in a while, I think that we may be able to obtain some critical financing to address these issues. So that's what it comes down to. That's what I'm going to be looking to do this session. And I look forward to also working with Representative Palm and issues impacting, I think, the Connecticut River for her, which is obviously a critical waterway to our state.
Representative Gresko, you also mentioned invasive species as well.
I did, and I could point to what Representative Harding was referring to as far as funds go. We were able to get an invasive species stamp piece of legislation that was passed a few years ago that has generated some funding, and some projects were awarded that funding across the state. But there are specific areas like Candlewood Lake and the Connecticut River that are inundated with invasive species and would need some specific attention right out of the gate with the funding. So I would be in support of additional funding for those programs, and not just because it's the environmentally sound thing to do to help out our native species, but to Steve's point, a lot of people that vacation and have homes on Candlewood Lake, or fish and are boaters on Connecticut River are adversely affected by this. So it's another instance where government and business come together, and hopefully we can come up with that funding source to combat these species head on.
Great, thank you. And very quickly, with MIRA closing, waste crisis is obviously going to be a big issue coming up, not only in the short term, but long term as well. Are there any specifics that might come up this session in terms of legislation to address waste?
Well, we won't all jump in on that one. I would be honest and tell you probably not. I mean, I don't know what Christine's got going on, but MIRA has made plans and has submitted plans. I think that the plan has evolved not by brilliance and thought, but by circumstance. They've signed contracts to move as much of their waste as the other burn plants will accept. Costs are going to be higher, which was a very predictable outcome here. And whatever the burn plants can't take will be shipped out of the state. For all of us involved, a tremendous step backward and a failure on a million levels, although I think there was a lot of attempts to try to fix it. Some of it is just the politics of Hartford. Some of it is I mean, I think Hartford is tired of having that South Meadows burn plant, to be quite honest, and that drives a lot of this, but it's not only that. And as Senator Cohen said, the future, we have a bridge period here. The future has to be waste reduction, waste reduction, waste reduction, which means a lot of anaerobic digestion, getting as much out of the waste stream as we can, enhanced recycling, and then still no great plan for what's left, unfortunately. So, I was on the board of MIRA for the worst 6 months that I can ever imagine in public service. And they have a lot of studies that show that burning trash is still better than burying trash. After you reduce it and, get as much out as you can, burning it is still better. The question is, can you build another burn plant? Deep was rightly concerned about the possibility of valuing their energy at a higher rate because the competitors to MIRA are private, for-profit, private equity-owned companies. And they would love nothing more than to get more money out of the deal. But right now, we're left with a private solution, although I think they're probably all doing better because today's spot price for energy is 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So they're not crying. When it was 2 cents, the business is not viable without support. It's just that simple. So, but environmentally burning it is still the better thing.
And then very quickly to dovetail on that, as I sit in my office here, I can see the Gresko plant from Wheelabrator, and I'm sure that whatever volume or capacity they had left over will quickly be gone, as Norm was saying. All these other municipalities sign contracts with them. Yes, burning is better than shipping out to a landfill, but we have the opportunity here to think long term and think out of the box. And some of the ideas of around gasification and how that technology is expanding and being located in areas like New Jersey. I think that being seriously considered and letting the market drive that. In other words, having that be potentially the competitor of a trash burning facility, I think is something long term I would love to explore. Not so much picking one over the other, but letting the market decide and letting the municipalities decide where they want to send their municipal solid waste. Right now, it's kind of it's burning or landfill, and I'd like to have another alternative in there. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing I don't agree with is, for all the reasons Norm mentioned, I think we will have something this session come up on waste mitigation and waste reduction. You know, we've taken steps, like I said, last session on organic separation. I think we need to take a closer look at that. We already have many towns who've signed up for the incentives around pay as you throw. So I think we'll be taking a closer look at that. Will that happen this session? No, we're going to have to take a look and see how those towns are doing with those programs, but something's going to need to be done. Obviously, the burn plants that we have currently are not able to take on all of the capacity of MURA. As Norm mentioned, that trash will now be exported to landfills, which is, from an environmental perspective, just the worst thing that can happen. And so we need to do better, and we need to really be putting our heads together about how that's going to happen. And quite frankly, this is all costing municipalities and ultimately our taxpayers a lot of money. And so, you know, we all really need to be thinking long and hard about what we can do by way of waste reduction techniques. I think EPR is going to play a role here. I really do.
Great, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. While it's a short session and the shortest session possible, I think it's still going to be really busy. So in 30 seconds or less, what is your top issue for this session? And let's start with Representative Arconti.
Reliability and shifting more risk away from utility shareholders. Shifting more risk away from ratepayers towards shareholders. Make sure ratepayers get more cost benefits to our grid and infrastructure.
Great. Representative Harding?
From an environment committee perspective, you know, like we talked about with the lakes, you know, helping to preserve our natural resources, finding a good funding source for them, and then I'll add another one on there and helping address this waste crisis. I think this is something that, you know, we have to try to tackle. So,
Senator Cohen?
Climate action.
Representative Gresko?
I would say additional EPRs, which would engage the industry in multiple markets, and also assist us with our municipal solid waste. You know, one of the real quickly, the cylinders, you've all seen on social media the videos of these cylinders exploding in either refuse trucks or in the MRFs themselves. So, you know, it's both a public safety and health issue, along with getting them out of the waste stream, along with going with the EPRs. So I think that will help with the municipal solid waste going forward. Thank you.
Great. Senator Needleman?
I don't think I have much to add from what David had said. You know, where the burden falls here, you know, ratepayers versus shareholders. I think that in Connecticut, the ratepayers have borne a lot of the burden, and that's not okay. But honestly, with the dog and pony show that ISO is doing, they've highlighted a problem that it would be irresponsible for us not to begin to address if there's any way to do that. I just cannot see in good conscience a situation happening like happened in Texas, where at the worst possible time, people lost power because we have a bad market design for our grid. It just is unconscionable. So I'm going to make that as much of a mission as anything. I don't know that we can fix it, but at least we want to shine a light on it.
Great. And Chairman Gillett?
Well, Thank you. I feel privileged to get to go to last, but really I don't have anything to add to what Senator Needleman, Representative Arconti said. I think my priority on behalf of PURA is helping assess anything that is their priority. I think my priority is to help them assess the best, most cost-effective way to achieve that. So that's my priority this session and every session. So thanks for having me.
Great, and thank you all again for the time this morning and for sharing your ideas and what's going to be coming up in the 2022 session. All right, and back to you, Lee.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully everybody found that incredibly informative. I know that I did, and I think we've got some follow-up to do before the short session kicks off. But Ashley has done a yeoman's job of keeping us on time. And so I think we need to begin with our task force updates. And I don't know who wants to go first, so I'll let folks fight it out. Why don't we start with, I guess, air?
Okay, this is Jason, part of the Air Committee, co-chair. Steve Eidelman, who Lee mentioned, I think, is retiring, is having a microphone issue with his computer, so he may or may not have put something into the chat, but he did want to pass along his thanks. It looks like it just went into the chat now, so there you go. You can read that on your own. But he's not able to join in.
Amazing. They've already cut off his microphone at That's a damn shame.
Right. And the only update I have to share, and this only applies to facilities that have continuous emissions monitors. If you do not have one, then continue to play Candy Crush in the background there. But there is a change coming to Section 4 of the Connecticut air regulations, which the comment period closed on December 17th. And again, if you have SEMS, there are some significant impacts coming, including the requirement that everybody that has SEMS will need to submit a monitoring plan to the state for approval. You have already had to do that under the previous Section 4, but they never looked at them or acted on them. So they are requiring a fresh submission from everybody once this regulation goes into effect. There are some other changes in that regulation. Again, if you have continuous emission monitors, I encourage you to take a look at the draft regulation, and when it does get issued, I will provide an update on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Wow. Jason, you are just bound and determined to make sure that we get out of here on time, if not early. I see that Harold and Mark are both here. So, gentlemen, do you want to talk about waste? And your topic came up at least twice during the legislative session between waste to energy as well as the release-based working group. So I'm sure you've got stuff to report on.
Hi, Lee. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year to all. We do have a few items, a few updates for everybody. I'll start. Mark will then join in. And when I do get to the release-based, the working group, which will be probably my second item, if anybody on the working group is on this call, feel free to join in with some additional commentary and color with respect to what's going on with the working group and the issues that were identified during the legislative update. So with respect to spill reporting, release reporting, on November 11th, as you all may know, DEEP submitted the release reporting regulations to the legislative the LLRC, the Legislation Regulation Review Committee. It was taken up in December, on December 21st. The LRRC rejected without prejudice the spill regulations. If DEEP resubmits, no pun intended, If Deep resubmits by February 1st, they'll be on the March agenda. If Deep resubmits between February 1 and March 1, they will be on the LRC agenda for April. With respect to the rejection without prejudice, there were, as noted in the task force report, a number of technical comments, and there were several substantive comments. With respect to the substantive comments, one set had to do with the LRC focusing on the language that says that any person who indirectly causes a release or an imminent release is required to report. And the LRC focused on that language and said that it was unclear what's meant by indirectly cause and how that person would know if they indirectly caused the release. So they asked for further clarification, saying that the idea of the spill reporting regulations is to provide more certainty and more precision, but the language of person who indirectly causes is vague and ambiguous, and asked Deep to go back and clarify that language. In addition, the LCO raised, the LRC and the LCO raised issues with respect to a number of phrases with respect to reporting exceptions, such as language with respect to minor incidental drips, inconsequential amounts, small inconsequential quantities, or small or inconsequential petroleum sheen, and what that meant and how and what the burden was on the reporting community to determine what inconsequential amounts meant or minor incidental drips meant for reporting. So again, the LCO urged that the reporting thresholds be made clear so there's a uniform understanding of when a release is required to be reported. So as I said, those were rejected. The regulations were rejected without prejudice, and the ball is back in Deep's court with respect to responding to the rejection without prejudice. Turning to the release-based remediation program, the working group. Like I said, if anybody wants to jump in and provide some color commentary, that would be terrific. I'll just note that the working group continues to meet monthly. They met on December 14th and January 21st. At the December 14th meeting, they set deadlines for concept papers for the new phase 2 topical subcommittees for March of 2022. And there are 3 new topical subcommittees: modification of cleanup standards for lower risk releases, LEP implemented risk-based alternative cleanup standards, and the 3rd subcommittee is the cleanup completion documentation, verification, audit frequency, and timeframes. With that, I'll just pause for a second to see if anyone wants to, who's on this call, who's on the working group, wants to chime in with anything additional. Lee.
So I'll out myself. I asked the question about the unpleasant surprises at the working group. And there have been 2 of them. The first was a couple months ago.
Which is what I was referring to, Lee. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it was October, it might have been November, where Deep steadfastly. So first off, this working group is supposed to be jointly run by DECD and Deep. It has now very rapidly evolved into Graham Stevens is Gladys Knight and everybody else is a pip. And it's really Graham's show. And Graham's very efficient, does a great job, and the depth and breadth of what's being covered is phenomenal. However, it has become crystal clear in that late fall meeting that DEEP, as it's drafting regulations, has no intention of sharing a draft of those regulations with either the release-based working group in a small segment or more broadly with the regulated community. They're simply, the plan now is, I think they're going to take the regs out for draft and then simply follow the standard UAPA and Uniform Administrative Procedures Act methodology, so that there will be an opportunity to comment, obviously, but it's only going to be done formalistically. They're not going to allow anybody who's been putting in blood, sweat, and tears to do this. They did that over the objection of several of the legislators, and I thought that that was very interesting. But that came from nobody less than Katie Dyke, so I don't see that changing anytime soon. That was followed. Harold did a great job. Harold did a great job of articulating the three new working committees, the three new subcommittees that are working on things, including how you get rid of lower risk sites more expeditiously, how you get rid of those sites quickly, as well as what we can do for LEPs for risk-based criteria. And everybody in those two subcommittees, I'm not on either of those two, but I am on a different committee, but I'm surprised by the fact that the entire time this statute was being considered and all through the working group, it was all Massachusetts, 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 and we were going to look at Massachusetts. Well, several individuals in these two other working groups were looking at the Method 3 risk-based program that Massachusetts had, and on Tuesday evening, DEEP released a 3-page memo articulating why it was not going to use Method 3 for Massachusetts at all. And the memo boils down to two things. One, that LSPs do not do risk-based analyses in Massachusetts. There are licensed risk assessors who are a different category of individuals who do that sort of thing in Massachusetts. And the statute that enables DEEP and DECD to do this only contemplates using LEPs. And LEPs wouldn't necessarily be qualified to do this. The second thing is that DEEP believes that it does not have the authority for risk-based toxicological criteria. Rather, that is fully within the ambit of the Connecticut Department of Public Health. Looking at their statutory citations, I think DEEP may be right about both of those issues in terms of what the statute does. I think that we need to think about whether or not we would like the legislature to reopen that special act and consider adding these two things in, because without it, I don't know how we're ever going to get to risk-based cleanup standards on a site-by-site basis the way that you can do in Massachusetts, because neither DPH or DEEP have the personnel to get that done either now or after the great hiring frenzy of 2022. And I think that we are going to gum up the works, and we're going to have a program that is potentially worse than what we have now. And with that, I will get off my soapbox.
Thanks, Lee. You can just get rid of that spam call.
That was me.
Does,
Your warranty's out of date.
does anybody have anything else to add? This is a big issue. We're going to continue to follow it. With respect to page 5 of our report, I'll just note that way back in May on UST regulations, DEEP posted notice of an intent to adopt minor revisions to the UST regulations. Those regulations were approved by the LRC in October, and they became effective on November 30th of last year, and the links are in the write-up. And finally, at least for me, before I turn it over to Mark, and I'm doing a good job of chewing up a lot of time, is no update would be complete without a PFAS item. And that item is on the federal side of the house, that in December, EPA adopted the 5th unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, which is going to establish monitoring requirements on public water systems for 29 PFAS substances. I can say that 5 times fast. And under the rule, many public water systems will be required to collect data between 2023 and 2025. And with that, I'll turn this over to Mark.
Thank you, Harold. I thought there was some interesting contrast between comments made by Senator Cohen and Senator Needleman with respect to whether or not there would be any legislation on waste topics in the 2022 session. And I've been hearing quite a bit about the possibility of extended producer responsibility legislation. Representative Gresko repeatedly referred to the gas cylinders, which was a piece of legislation not adopted last year. But my understanding is that the DEEP is interested in expanding the EPR program to other materials, particularly packaging. So there now is legislation in Maine and Oregon governing packaging materials, and I believe that we will see attempts to adopt similar legislation in Connecticut, although I don't know how far that will go in the 2022 session. I'd like to make also a comment in regards to gasification as an alternative to burning waste or landfilling. And this was referenced by Representative Gresko. I'm unaware of any commercially operating gasification facilities treating waste in the United States at any significant level. And I'd be interested if anybody in the audience has any information on that. I believe there have been multiple attempts to utilize gasification or pyrolysis, but none that I know of have succeeded commercially. And just as an aside, I'd like to mention that the topic of mergers and acquisitions has become a priority for the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, and it potentially impacts activity in Connecticut as we now have a couple new players in the state that are very sizable companies moving in from Casella Waste, acquired what was previously Willimantic Waste, a Swedish private equity company. EQT Infrastructure acquired Covanta, and a new conglomeration known as Win Waste is now moving all through the Northeast with the former Wheelabrator company is now part of that group, and some other waste companies, including Tunnel Hill. And Tunnel Hill is expected to be a key player in moving waste out of Connecticut into Ohio once the Mira facility closes. So I think it'll be a key year in terms of activity with respect to mergers and acquisitions and antitrust legislation or investigations. And a lot of this may hinge on the results of the 2022 congressional elections, because currently the Biden administration seems to have a number of key players who are pushing for increased oversight of the private equity markets, mergers and acquisitions. And ultimately, this could impact the waste industry in Connecticut. On a related note, you may have seen that St. Francis is now bringing action against Hartford Healthcare for essentially what they call poaching cardiologists. So I think that in today's marketplace, it is a key concern for consumers as well as utilities and ratepayers. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Back to you, Lee.
I was going to give folks at least 10 seconds to ask more questions, but I guess not. Okay, from here we go to water. Wojtek and Tom, what do you got for us?
Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Start off, for those of you who joined us last month, you know that we have, I have a new co-partner, Thomas Salimano of Lorero, who hopefully will be joining us or is on the call as we speak. There's not much to report. I only would encourage people to pay attention to some of the expiration dates on the stormwater side of things, mainly the commercial stormwater general permit. Looks like it will be expiring in May this year. So hopefully DEP has a good plan for us as far as that goes. And also there is talk about revising the existing general permit for the industrial stormwater. Even though that does not expire until 2024, DEP will be modifying that, so we should be paying attention to that. That's all I had. One tidbit of good news, we have secured the significant industrial users registration authorization from DEP for both Command and Chematics, so that's good news for us. Hopefully everybody is seeing the same thing on your fronts. And other than that, Tom, do you want to chime in?
Only a couple of pieces that I'll add for those that may be subject to it. There is an ability for an extension request for use of some Class B PFAS firefighting foams in very specific circumstances. So on page 1 of 13 on the status summary, there's a link to that form. For those that have diversion permits and annual reporting requirements, there's a link for the diversion permit reporting form on page 6 of 13. Again, in the previous report, it was mentioned that it was available just so people don't have to hunt and peck through the DEP's website. There's a link provided. As Harold mentioned earlier, UCMR 5 is out. There's a lengthy discussion on that provided herein as well. And I guess the last thing I'll point out is the EPA and Army have issued a proposed rule on WOTUS, Waters of the United States. That is addressed on pages 10 and 11. That's pretty much all that I wanted to point out. Any questions